The evening was buzzing with music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses inside one of the city's most luxurious hotels. Guests in designer suits and glittering gowns filled the grand ballroom, but all eyes often drifted toward one man. A billionaire known for his bold personality and love for attention. He was the kind of man who never missed an opportunity to test others, always ready with a smirk and a challenge. That night, however, he would meet someone who would turn the tables in a way no one expected. Across the room, a young waitress moved quietly from table to table, balancing trays with grace. She wasn't dressed to shine under the spotlight, yet something about her presence carried a quiet strength. While most people barely noticed the staff, the billionaire's gaze locked onto her with curiosity. With his usual confidence, he called her forward, his voice echoing over the music. Then, with a smirk that made the room fall silent, he dared her to dance in front of everyone. The crowd laughed softly, some whispering that it was impossible. How could a simple waitress with no glittering gown or stage presence possibly hold her own in front of the wealthy and powerful? For a moment, she hesitated, her eyes scanning the expectant faces around her. But then, something in her expression shifted, a quiet determination that no one saw coming. She stepped forward, the room holding its breath. The music changed, and as the first beat dropped, the unexpected happened. Every move she made was filled with confidence and fire, the kind of energy that could not be ignored. The laughter faded, whispers turned into stunned silence, and suddenly, the spotlight that once belonged to the billionaire shifted entirely to her. And in that instant, the man who thought he controlled the stage was frozen in place, unable to look away. But what happened next shocked the entire room even more. The billionaire had built his reputation on being untouchable. Wherever he went, people either admired him or feared him, and he had grown used to controlling the room. But as the waitress moved across the floor, it was clear this was no ordinary moment. Her dance wasn't polished like a professional performer, yet it carried a raw passion that drew everyone in. Each step spoke of resilience, of someone who had fought battles no one in that glittering ballroom could imagine. The crowd, once amused, was now mesmerized. Whispers began to stir among the guests. Who was she? How could someone who blended into the background steal the stage so effortlessly? Some leaned closer to one another, recalling that she had only started working at the hotel a few months ago. Others insisted they had never seen her before. But no matter the speculation, one thing was certain: she was no longer invisible. The billionaire sat frozen in his seat, his usual smirk replaced by a look that few had ever seen on his face: surprise. He wasn't a man who liked being caught off guard, and yet something about her presence unsettled him. Perhaps it was the way she held her head high, unshaken by the wealth and power surrounding her. Perhaps it was the energy in her movements that seemed to challenge him without a single word spoken. The music grew louder, her steps sharper, and the energy in the room shifted entirely. Guests who had once turned to the billionaire for entertainment were now cheering her on. And though he sat in silence, eyes fixed on her every move, deep down he knew something important had just begun. But what this moment would lead to was still a mystery, one that no one in the room could predict. The waitress had never asked for attention. She had taken the job at the hotel simply to make ends meet, keeping her head down and blending into the background. Yet now, under the golden lights of the ballroom, she was the center of it all. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just serving drinks or clearing plates. She was commanding the gaze of every guest in the room. The music carried her, but it wasn't just about the rhythm. Each movement seemed to hold a hidden story, as though she was silently telling the crowd that she was more than the uniform she wore. The billionaire's challenge had been meant as a joke, a passing dare to entertain his wealthy friends. But as he sat back in his chair, something about her unsettled him. He had spent years surrounded by performers, artists, and professionals who lived for the spotlight. Yet none of them carried the same unshakable energy she did. It was as if she wasn't dancing for them at all, but for herself. And that truth made the room feel different. Guests exchanged glances, some with admiration, others with disbelief. A few whispered that the billionaire had finally met his match, though no one dared say it aloud. He leaned forward, studying her with a focus that bordered on obsession. She had stepped into his world uninvited, yet somehow she was the one. In control, her eyes never met his directly, but her confidence spoke louder than any confrontation. The tension grew heavier with every passing beat, like an invisible rope pulling the two of them closer. The room waited for what might come next, sensing that this was no ordinary performance. Something deeper was unfolding, and no one knew. Where it would lead? The music thundered through the ballroom, each beat echoing like a drum roll to something no one could yet name. The billionaire leaned forward, his glass untouched, his usual calm slipping away. Around him, his circle of wealthy friends sat frozen, unable to laugh or interrupt. The waitress's dance had turned the atmosphere electric, every step sharper, every turn daring. What had started as a casual dare was now something far more serious. Something that seemed to challenge the balance of power in the room. She moved with a confidence that no one expected, her expression calm yet unyielding. It wasn't just a dance anymore, it felt like a statement. Her presence filled every corner of the grand ballroom, overshadowing even the chandeliers that sparkled above. The guests were no longer whispering. They were silent, caught between awe and anticipation. Everyone sensed that the moment was building toward something they couldn't quite see, but they felt it in the air. The billionaire's jaw tightened. As he watched, he was a man who thrived on control, but for the first time, control had slipped from his hands. This waitress, this woman no one had noticed before tonight, had shifted the room away from him without saying a single word, and that fact dug deep under his skin. Yet he couldn't look away. The fire in her movements drew him in like a magnet, pulling him into a world where wealth, titles, and reputation no longer mattered. The final notes of the music swelled, building to their peak, and the room leaned forward collectively, hearts pounding in rhythm with the sound. The billionaire gripped the arm of his chair, his expression unreadable, as though preparing himself for whatever would come next. The waitress, with her last daring step, froze under the spotlight. And in that silence, the tension reached its highest point, leaving the entire room waiting for the moment that would change everything. The silence after her final move was heavy, almost too much to bear. For a moment, no one dared to clap, as though the room itself was holding its breath. Then, before anyone could react, the billionaire rose from his seat. His sudden movement sent a ripple of tension across the ballroom. People expected applause, maybe even a smug remark, but instead his voice rang out, sharp and unexpected. "Do it again," he demanded, his tone more commanding than playful this time. The crowd gasped. What had begun as a dare was no longer a simple game. His eyes locked on hers, cold and calculating, as if he wasn't just testing her talent anymore, but her strength, her very identity. The waitress stood still, her chest rising and falling from the intensity of the performance. She hadn't expected to be challenged again, not like this. But something in his expression made her realize this was about more than a dance. It was a battle of pride, of power, of who would stand taller when the night was over. The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the shift in energy. The billionaire, who had always controlled the stage, seemed threatened. And yet there was something else in his stare, a spark of curiosity, almost admiration, buried beneath his pride. He wasn't just trying to break her. He wanted to. know how far she was willing to go before she could respond. The orchestra struck another note, as though sensing the drama. The lights dimmed slightly, spotlight sharpening on her once again. The billionaire stepped closer this time, closing the gap between them. The crowd held its breath, realizing this was no longer a performance for their entertainment. This was the start of a confrontation that would push both of them beyond their limits, and no one could predict how far it would go. The air was thick with anticipation as the music surged once more. The billionaire stood only a few steps away from the waitress now, his presence towering, his challenge hanging in the air like a blade. The guests leaned forward, eager to witness the outcome of a duel that had started with a simple dare but grown into something much bigger. The waitress, however, did not flinch. Instead, she took a slow breath, lifted her chin, and stepped boldly into the spotlight. Her second dance was unlike the first. It wasn't just passion this time, it was defiance. Every movement carried strength, every turn carved out space that seemed to strip power from the man who had tried to belittle her. The billionaire, for all his wealth and influence, suddenly looked like the one being tested. The ballroom erupted with energy, cheers rising as the waitress poured her soul into each step. By the time the final note struck, the crowd was on its feet, applauding.